Yes, Nostalgia Merchant. I still need your catalog so I can see what all Laurel and Hardy films you have available on Beta 2 and VHS. You're out of business. Why don't you do something to help me? Come, Stanley. Let's take a look at the releases of Laurel and Hardy's short films today on the 1980s VHS tapes from Nostalgia Merchant. So we talked about the release history of Laurel and Hardy films and shorts a couple videos ago, but we didn't talk too much about the short subjects. Truthfully, there's less to say in that regard. Several years ago, we got this release, which basically covers the 40 sound shorts, plus a few interesting variants and unusual inclusions there. The silent shorts, I think, are gradually re-entering the physical media market through the Laurel and Hardy Year 1 and ideally eventually a Year 2 set. But I thought, well, we've talked about Nostalgia Merchant and we've talked about Laurel and Hardy films and how for many years people had to track down those old VHS tapes with that logo there in order to get their favorite Stan and Ollie films for their collection. So I thought, we'll look at how the short subjects were released and talk some about the 9-volume series called Laurel and Hardy Comedy Classics. So here's volume 1 of Comedy Classics, each tape containing 4 short films. This one with The Music Box, County Hospital, The Live Ghost, and Twice 2. This tape was printed in 1987. You can see each one follows basically the same sort of artwork, the same kind of format. Good picture Stan Ollie on the front, kind of this parchment background there. Looks really nice. And this tape advertises other Laurel and Hardy releases from Nostalgia Merchant, including Sons of the Desert, The Bohemian Girl, Pardon Us, Swiss Miss, Way Out West, and The Flying Deuces, as well as additional short subjects there. The Music Box, included in this set, their Oscar-winning short, absolute classic. County Hospital, big fan favorite. The Live Ghost, I think one of their best horror shorts. And Twice 2, it's always fun to see them play a dual role, in this case themselves and their sisters, who each married the opposing one. So like Ollie's sister married Stan, that kind of thing. It's not a great one, but it's always funny to see them in drag doing all that nonsense. Here in green and yellow we have Volume 2 with 1930's Blotto, 1932's Toad in a Hole, Bratz, and Hog Wild. So all kinds of classics. There's a picture from Hog Wild at the end. That's a fun one too, trying to install Stan and Ollie's new radio. Blotto and Bratz, I know, have both had multiple releases over the years with different soundtracks and whatnot. Blotto, one of my favorite Laurel and Hardy shorts, is actually only available in an edited form too. The original version being lost, so I think it's 1937 reissue print with additional background music is the only extant copy. This is interesting too because the Spanish version of Blotto survives. I think it's La Vida Nocturna. It and all the other surviving Laurel and Hardy foreign language releases were available on this set, with Stan and Ollie actually speaking Spanish or French. None of those made it to this VHS series. I don't think any of those got released in the US to home video before that DVD set that I just showed you. But Blotto's a lot of fun. Toad in a Hole is pretty good too. That was later remade by the Three Stooges as Booby Doops in 1945. That one's pretty funny too, but Laurel and Hardy did it first. The Stooges kind of went a different direction with it as well. And Bratz, of course, has Stan and Ollie playing their own children and interaction with giant props and animated mice, things like that. Pretty fun. A lot of good ones on that tape. Volume 3. Then we have Blue on Blue. We have Oliver the Eighth, Busybodies, Their First Mistake, and Dirty Work. So 2 of kind of the horror-themed shorts, even though this still has the shrink wrap, the tape itself is open. There's a picture from Oliver the Eighth, Oliver marrying the murderous widow, and Dirty Work, of course, has them as chimney sweeps. And Sam Adams, as the butler, gets the most famous line when he's fed up with Stan and Ollie's hijinks and says, "Somewhere an electric chair is waiting." That kind of thing. But the professor obsessed with the Fountain of Youth and Ollie gets turned into an ape and so on. Busybodies, the short at the sawmill. That one's a big fan favorite. And Their First Mistake, which isn't really, I think, one of their more popular ones, but where they try to raise an adopted child. Interesting stuff. They all at least have some funny parts to them. Volume 4, here in kind of the orange and cream kind of look there, has Another Fine Mess, Come Clean, Laughing Gravy, and Any Old Port. A nice picture from Come Clean. Come Clean's a lot of fun. Hiding a woman from their wives, they rescued her from suicide, and now she demands they take care of her. It's an interesting premise and kind of unique amongst Laurel and Hardy shorts too. They were going for something a little edgier, I guess. Another Fine Mess, of course, is a remake of their Silent Duck Soup. Interestingly, the original opening credits had these girls as usherettes come out and kind of speak the credits out loud. These VHS tapes use pretty low quality prints, but probably my biggest beef with them, we'll talk about a couple more as we go, is that they use like multiple sources for them. So we have some of those spoken word credits, but we also have regular title cards from later prints spliced in, and it looks really sloppy. And I'm glad that when releases like this came out, which not only did digital restoration, but also did their best to preserve original assets, that was definitely a big plus. Any Old Port, that's a fun one with Walter Long. Laughing Gravy had a very complicated release history for Laurel and Hardy because it had multiple endings filmed, and I believe there's actually a version that combines both endings. This uses the shorter copy. I don't think the longer one with Stan about to receive a big inheritance, I don't think that was released in the US until this set also. So some fun ones on there, definitely some classics. Still tapes printed in 1987. Volume 5, kind of a maroon color there for you. Again, they're all open on the bottom, even if they still have the shrink wrap. We have 1931's Be Big. We've talked about that before. Stan and Ollie trying to sneak off to their lodge meeting and can't get their riding boots on. This one was at least thought to be in the public domain, and we talked about that when I reviewed that giant public domain set in the last video. But I don't think it actually is, so there's some confusion there. It's a fun short though, and that's what the picture on the back was from. Perfect Day, one of their early sound films. That was remade by the Three Stooges as Pardon My Clutch. Stan and Ollie do a nice job with it, and for an early sound film, there's a lot of stuff shot outdoors, which I kind of like. Night Owls, that's a classic, and it's been not only colorized, here's the colorized tape, we'll come back to these in a little bit, but there's also a version in Spanish, an extended version in Spanish that was released on that other Laurel and Hardy set, and that's pretty cool too because it has a lot of gags that aren't in the English-speaking one. And we have one of the most underrated ones with Helpmates. In Blanche Payson is Ollie's mean wife. Stan tries to help him clean up the house after a poker party, and house ends up catching on fire. So there you go. But Helpmates has a lot of good gags. It's kind of a bottle episode, but Stan and Ollie can do a lot with just some props and some silliness there. Still, I believe, this tape was actually printed in 1986. Must be an earlier one, at least according to the back. Here with the orange and yellow, we have Volume 6, containing 1931's Our Wife, 1935's The Fixer-Uppers, actually a Christmas-themed one, The Fixer-Uppers. The Three Stooges would later redo that as Boobs and Arms, or at least part of it as Boobs and Arms. That one also gave me the line I used in my last Stan and Ollie video about picking up the phone and being told, it's a long distance from Atlanta, Georgia. This also has their Laurel and Hardy short subject two-parter. 1934's Them Thar Hills and 1935's Tit for Tat. Them Thar Hills was always a big favorite with them inadvertently drinking moonshine instead of water and getting horribly drunk. And Tit for Tat, the sequel, where they open up their electronics store next door to the man whose wife they accidentally dragged into drunken revelry. That was, I believe, nominated for an Oscar, but I don't think it won. But that has a lot of good, prop destruction gags, that kind of thing, involving everything from light bulbs to molasses. Pretty fun stuff. Our Wife, of course, probably most famous today for Ollie having plus-size actress Babe London as his wife and a minus-sized car, I'll put it that way. Some good gags there. Maybe not politically correct, but very funny. Almost done there with Volume 7 on orange and red. We have Below Zero, a classic for winter time. Them playing in the good old summertime on a snowy street corner is definitely worth a few laughs there. We have their last short subject, Thicker Than Water, which involves them spending all their money to buy a clock at an auction, among other things. Kind of a silly one there. And you could tell it had a higher budget. They do a lot of kind of different things with it. It's a little more artsy than some of their other short subjects are. After that, it was strictly feature films. Midnight Patrol, never a big favorite of mine. I do like the publicity shot from that film where they're inept police officers and so on. And one of the most underrated shorts I think they ever did, Me and My Pal, which has a super simple premise and a great performance by James Finlayson as Ollie's prospective father-in-law, Peter Cucumber. But just a huge cast and a giant jigsaw puzzle leads to some very interesting hijinks. So, some fun ones on Volume 7. Tape also printed 1986, and they still do indeed advertise many other Laurel and Hardy films and shorts. Volume 8, blue and white there. We have the Laurel Hardy Murder Case. So another fairly early sound one. I believe the first one to use Here's Another Nice Mess You've Gotten Me Into. So that's pretty interesting. And that seems to be a big fan favorite too. Three Stooges remade that as If a Body Meets a Body, and I like that one a lot better than I like Stan and Ollie's original. But Stan and Ollie's original is also a longer short film. It's more like a half hour than 15 minutes. So they had some time to fill. Certainly more atmospheric than the Stooges version was. This has Men o' War, which is a really fun one where they're sailors on leave, and gave me one of my favorite exchanges where they're trying to figure out how they can treat these girls to a little snack at the ice cream fountain and not spend all their money, with the famous line, soda, 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 and you, Stanley, which Stanley is supposed to refuse but keeps ordering things instead. We have Scram, this picture with Vivian Oakland on the back, that's from Scram. Richard Kramer is the judge who orders them out of town, and they end up not leaving, but not necessarily through their own accord. That's a pretty good one. And One Good Turn, today most famous for the scene where Stan attacks Ollie and inflicts lots of slapstick damage on him. I like Mary Carr in that one. She is a good supporting part, this little old lady, but she has really good comic timing. Some fun ones on there for sure. Tape also, back 1987. Alright, and our last one. As far as I know, there was no Volume 10. We'll talk about the 4 shorts that should have been on Volume 10, but I've never been able to find one. Here's Volume 9. We have Bohunks, the longest short subject they did, which I guess you could even argue is something more like Buster Keaton's Sherlock Jr. It's sort of like either a very long short or a very short feature at about 40-some minutes. That has them in the French Foreign Legion, be remade as Flying Deuces. I really like Bohunks. I'm glad they include it here. Chickens Come Home. That's where the picture in the back of them with Thelma Todd comes from. Also a remake of A Silent they did. That one had an extensive expansion when it was filmed in Spanish. That one was first released on here, but there's this big dinner party scene with all these different vaudeville acts and stuff. It's unusual. I don't know. We have Going Bye-Bye, which was always one of my favorites growing up. This VHS tape sadly uses a horrible print of it with like their audio clips missing, so there's like a lot of weird cuts in the footage, and they even eliminate some of the lines inadvertently in these cuts. You know, after the man that they snitched on is condemned to death, and Ollie's chastising Stan for telling the judge to hang him, and he ruins one of the funniest lines in the short when he said, "It'd have been fine if you said, 'Aren't you going to hang him?' Couldn't you see he was annoyed?" But they cut that little bit out there, sadly. And lastly, we have Birthmarks. This is another one that got kind of extensively re-edited. They put new credits on it. They look like they're taken from maybe like a 16mm print, like from Black Hawk Films or something like that. And that's kind of upsetting because it interrupts the flow to have these sudden changes in picture and sound quality. But Birthmarks, a very early sound short, but it's got some fun parts, especially Silas Wilcox is the conductor. He gets my favorite line when Ollie's bragging about them being musicians, and he just looks at them and says, "I'll bet you're good." So, always good for some laughs there. So there were 4 shorts that didn't make it. 2 of them, The Hooskow and The Chimp, I don't think ever got released on either a Nostalgia Merchant or even a Video Treasures release. Both were colorized as part of the Cabin Fever colorized short subject line. Someday we'll talk more about these. These are pretty interesting, but at only 1 short per video, it's kind of wasteful too. But for the time, the colorizing technology they use looks at least decent, certainly better than some of the other colorized films we've seen. And the other 2 that didn't make it onto a Volume 10, if there had been one, were 2 of their very early sound films, Unaccustomed as We Are, their first talkie, and They Go Boom. Both of those were, for some reason, incorporated instead into Nostalgia Archive's Lost Films of Laurel and Hardy line. So both of those were released on the Lost Films of Laurel and Hardy DVD sets, that kind of thing. So here's the They Go Boom Big Business double feature. Big Business is a silent, not a sound film. But it's interesting that for some reason they never did a proper Volume 10. I found a couple Volume 10s on eBay, but I don't think they're legitimate because they don't follow the cover art. And some of them, instead of including all 4 of those missing shorts, include some of the ones Stan and Ollie did guest appearances on. Ones like On the Loose, which had Thelma Todd and Zazu Pitts, or the Little Rascals' Short Wild Poses, that kind of thing. And that's sort of weird why they would choose a cameo, special appearance as opposed to a real thing. So Nostalgia Merchant for many years cornered the market on Laurel and Hardy feature films and also on their short films. But we'll take a look, see at what Video Treasures was up to, as well as some of the silent film releases in the near future. Until then, my friends, go out and make sure to stay out of another nice mess. Thank you.